I remember the way her fingers hovered over the screen, how her thumb brushed the edge of that bright little post button. She didn't even look nervous, just amused, like she was dropping some harmless prank into the world. And when the picture went live, her sitting on the edge of our bed in nothing but a lace set and a smile that wasn't meant for me, I swear the air in the room shifted. My chest felt hollow, like I'd swallowed the last piece of something I'd been clinging to for years. And for a second, all I could think was, how did we get here? Most days I started before sunrise. The garage was a squat concrete box off Route 14, the paint on the sign peeling at the corners. But it was mine. That smell of old oil, burnt rubber, and cheap coffee, it felt more like home than the house ever did. I'd work with the radio playing low, just enough to drown out my own thoughts. Some guys needed company to stay sane. I was the opposite. Give me a busted carburetor and a few hours alone, and I could pretend the rest of my life wasn't unraveling. Funny thing is, I used to bring her here. Back when we first started seeing each other, Lauren liked to perch on the stool by the front counter. She'd cross her legs, sip the bad coffee I brewed, and tease me about the grease smudges on my cheek. Sometimes I'd look up and catch her watching me work with this soft expression, like she couldn't believe she'd ended up with a man who fixed engines instead of crunching numbers in an office. I thought that look meant respect. Maybe love. Now I'm not sure what it was. I still remember the first night we met. She'd pulled up in that clattering old Toyota, window stuck halfway down, heater coughing out stale air. I'd been closing up for the evening, but she smiled and asked if I could squeeze in an oil change. It was the kind of smile that made you forget you were tired. Afterward, she invited me across the road to a little diner. We sat in a booth by the window, talking until they flipped the chairs onto the tables. She told me she liked how I listened. I told her I liked how she never seemed embarrassed to say what she wanted. It felt easy in a way nothing had before. Those early months were a haze of late-night drives, cheap burgers, and too much laughter. She'd slip her hand under my arm when we walked, leaning into me like she was sure I'd never let her fall. I don't know when that stopped. I just know that one morning I woke up and realized she'd turned her back to me in bed, and it felt like a wall had gone up between us. It started small. New clothes, different perfume. She'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror for an hour, tilting her chin, studying her reflection like she was preparing for something important. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everybody changes. Maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself. But then came the photos. I noticed them when I walked in one night, arms full of takeout. She was on the couch, phone propped up on a little tripod I'd never seen before. The screen showed her posing, hips cocked, lips parted. I stood there, not even setting down the bags, just watching. She didn't notice me for a few seconds. When she did, she laughed. "What?" she said, like I was overreacting. "I'm just messing around." She said it was harmless, that it was just a way to feel confident. I tried to believe her. I'd never been the jealous type, and the idea of policing what she wore or posted made my skin crawl. So I swallowed it. I told myself it would blow over, but it didn't. I started finding little clues. Notifications that popped up on her screen when she left it unlocked. Comments from men I'd never met, with usernames like Just Here For You and Mr. Midnight. I tried not to look, but it was like standing on train tracks and pretending you didn't see the lights coming. One evening, I finally said it. We just finished dinner, some frozen pasta she barely touched. She was scrolling through her phone like I wasn't in the room. "Lauren," I said, as calm as I could, "I need you to stop posting those pictures." She looked up slowly, her mouth curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm telling you this is disrespectful. To me. To us." For a moment, she seemed almost surprised. Then she sighed and set the phone face down. "Fine," she said. "I won't do it anymore. If it makes you feel that bad." And because I wanted to believe her, I let it go. I wanted to think a promise meant something. That night, she curled up next to me in bed for the first time in weeks. I let my guard down. It lasted maybe a month. I came back from work late one Thursday. The garage had been chaos, 2 customers screaming over a bill, an alternator that refused to cooperate. All I wanted was a hot shower and a quiet evening. But when I walked through the door, she was sitting cross-legged on the couch, phone in hand, a grin spreading across her face. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice flat. She didn't answer. She just tilted the screen toward me. Another account. Another set of photos, this time even bolder. She must have seen something on my face then, because she dropped the phone onto the cushion. "You said you'd stop," I said quietly. "It's not a big deal," she snapped. "I'm not doing anything wrong." I don't remember exactly what I said next. Just that my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would crack my ribs. I know I told her she was lying, that I couldn't trust her, that she was making me feel small in my own house. Her eyes filled with tears, but even then, I couldn't tell if it was guilt or just annoyance that I'd caught her again. We didn't talk for almost 2 weeks after that. We moved around each other like strangers. She'd leave early in the morning and come home late, sometimes without explanation. I started sleeping on the couch, not because she asked me to, But because I couldn't stand to hear her breathing beside me, I kept thinking of that first night in the diner, wondering how it turned into this. Then, one evening, she came home with grocery bags and set them down like nothing had happened. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small. "I don't know why I keep doing this. I guess I just want people to see me. But I don't want to hurt you." I looked at her for a long time. I wanted to believe her so badly. So I nodded. "We made up. Sort of." She reached for my hand, and I let her hold it. But a part of me had already started to detach, and I didn't know how to stitch it back. During those weeks, Kira started stopping by more often. She'd bring over a container of stew or a loaf of bread, saying she'd made too much. We'd talk in the garage, leaning against the workbench. She never pried, but she also never pretended she didn't see what was happening. Once, when I was struggling to find the right words, she just touched my arm and said, "You deserve someone who's proud to stand beside you." Sometimes she'd text me late at night, just to check if I was okay. Those messages became a small thread holding me together. One night, she stayed a little longer than usual, watching me clean tools. "If you ever need to talk," she said softly, "or if it gets too heavy, call me. Anytime." I nodded, not trusting myself to answer out loud. And then came the last time. The time that finally broke whatever hope I'd been clinging to. I came home early. My shift ended sooner than planned, and I thought maybe we could sit down, try again to figure out what we were doing. The living room was dark except for the glow of her phone. She didn't see me standing there. She was perched on the edge of the couch, hair falling over her shoulders, her face lit up by the screen. And I knew, without even seeing it yet, that she was posting again. I stepped closer, just enough to read the caption, finally free to be myself. The world went quiet in my head. I didn't feel anger so much as an enormous, tired emptiness. Like I'd been digging a tunnel, convinced there was light on the other side, and finally hit solid rock. I don't remember putting my keys down. I don't remember taking off my jacket. I only remember how quiet the room was, like it was holding its breath. Lauren finally noticed me standing there. She didn't jump or look guilty. She just looked, annoyed, like I'd interrupted her in the middle of something important. I waited a beat, hoping she'd close the app, maybe say she'd made a mistake. But she didn't. She locked the phone, dropped it on the coffee table, and looked up at me with that same flat stare she'd been perfecting for months. "You're home early," she said. I nodded, feeling every muscle in my jaw tighten. I didn't trust myself to speak yet. She crossed her legs and raised her eyebrows like she was waiting for me to start yelling. But there was no point. I'd already said everything worth saying. "You promised," I said finally, my voice low. She shrugged one shoulder. "And you promised not to make a big deal out of every little thing." I closed my eyes, just for a second. I could smell her perfume, something sweet and expensive she hadn't worn when we met. Everything about her felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "Posting yourself half-naked online isn't a little thing," I said. My hands were steady, even if my heart wasn't. "It's just pictures," she snapped, like that settled it. "I'm not doing anything you should be so insecure about." I almost laughed at that, but there was nothing funny left in me, just a kind of dull ache. She couldn't, or wouldn't, understand. I wasn't jealous of the attention itself. I was angry she needed it more than she needed to keep her word to me. I turned and walked into the kitchen because I couldn't stand the sight of her face just then. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. I remembered the first morning she'd moved in. She'd made pancakes while I showered. She'd danced around the kitchen barefoot, humming under her breath. Back then, I thought I'd never be able to love anyone the way I loved her. Now, I wasn't sure I even recognized her. She didn't follow me right away. When she finally came to stand in the doorway, she crossed her arms over her chest like she was bracing for a storm. "Look," she said, her voice softer. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I keep doing this." I turned to face her. She was crying, but the tears didn't make me feel anything except tired. I wondered if she'd rehearsed this apology in her head. "I don't want to hurt you," she went on. Sometimes I feel invisible. And when people notice me, it feels like I matter." I opened my mouth to tell her that she already mattered, but the words felt hollow. I tried that line before, and it hadn't changed anything. "You matter to me," I said anyway, because it was the truth, even if it didn't fix a damn thing. She wiped her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry." For a minute, neither of us moved. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my waist. I let her, but as she buried her face against my chest, I felt like we were two people pretending to be the couple we used to be. After that night, we tried to patch things up again. She stopped posting, or at least she was more careful to hide it. She deleted the accounts I knew about. For a while, things almost felt normal. She cooked dinner a few times a week. She'd sit beside me on the couch and lean her head on my shoulder. It was almost enough to make me think we'd turned a corner. But it never lasted. Some evenings, I'd catch her staring at her phone with that same restless hunger. Like there was something in those likes and comments she couldn't get from real life. From me. And I hated that part of myself that kept wondering what the hell was so wrong with our life together that she needed strangers to validate her. Kira came by more often during that stretch. She never said outright that she was worried, but it was clear in the way she'd linger in the doorway, her eyes flicking from me to Lauren and back again. Sometimes she'd catch me alone in the garage. She'd offer to help with something she had no business touching, a tool rack, a box of parts, just to have a reason to stay a little longer. One evening, I was tightening a bolt on a customer's truck when she appeared in the doorway. She held up a paper bag. "Brought you dinner," she said. "Figured you'd forget to eat." "Thanks," I said, and meant it. I set the wrench down and wiped my hands on a rag. "You don't have to keep checking on me, you know." Her smile was a little sad. "Maybe I don't, but I want to." We sat on the tailgate, splitting a couple of sandwiches. She didn't push me to talk, but somehow that made it easier to open up. "She's trying," I said finally. "I think, but I don't know if she can stop." Kira picked at the crust of her sandwich. "Some people can't stand to be unseen, even for a minute." I nodded. "Yeah." She looked up, her gaze steady. "Just don't let her make you feel small. You don't deserve that." I didn't answer. I just stared at the grease-stained floor and tried to imagine a version of my life where I wasn't constantly wondering when the next lie would land. A couple of weeks later, Lauren came home late again. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to check my phone for any clue where she'd been. When she slipped under the covers, she smelled like cheap wine and expensive perfume. I waited a moment before speaking. "You were posting again, weren't you?" She didn't answer. The silence was enough. I turned on my side to face her, even though it felt pointless. "Why? Why do you keep doing this?" She sighed, sounding irritated. "Because it makes me feel alive. Because I'm tired of feeling like some boring wife." "You promised," I said. My voice cracked, just a little. She looked over her shoulder. Her eyes were flat. "Then maybe you shouldn't have believed me." That hurt more than I wanted to admit. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling again, waiting for the anger to cool. But it didn't. The next day, I couldn't stand to be in the house. I drove out to the lake, the place we used to go when things were still good. I sat on the hood of my truck, watched the water turn gold in the evening light, and tried to figure out when I'd lost her. Maybe I never really had her to begin with. I thought about calling Kira, but I didn't want to dump everything on her again. So I just sat there until the stars came out. And when I finally drove home, I felt something settle in my chest. Like I'd already decided what needed to happen, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud. A few days later, Kira stopped by again. She'd baked something, some kind of banana bread that filled the garage with a warm, sweet smell. We stood near the workbench, the overhead light buzzing softly. "You look tired," she said. "I am." She hesitated, then reached out and touched my arm. "If you ever need to leave, just leave. You don't have to wait for her to figure it out." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I know." She pulled her hand back slowly. "And if you do call me, please." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say more. The last straw came the following week. I came home early, again. The garage had been slow, so I closed up, hoping maybe we could talk. Maybe we could find some scrap of what we used to have. But when I walked in, she was on the couch, her phone in her hand, her face bathed in blue light. I didn't even have to look to know what she was doing. I stepped closer, just enough to see the caption, "Finally free to be myself." Her head jerked up, and for the first time, I saw something like fear in her eyes. But I was done. All that anger, that confusion, that hope, I let it drain out of me. All that was left was a bone-deep certainty. I walked to the kitchen, took off my ring, and set it on the table. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't break when I finally spoke. "I'm done, Lauren." She started to protest, her words tumbling over each other, but I didn't hear them. I was already gathering her things, stuffing them into bags, moving with a calm I didn't know I still had. She followed me from room to room, her voice rising and cracking. "You can't just throw this away." But the thing she didn't get was that she had already thrown it away, piece by piece, every time she chose strangers over me. I carried the bags to the porch and set them down. She stood behind me in the doorway, crying. I turned to face her one last time. "Now you're free," I said, my voice flat. "Like you wanted." And then I closed the door. The house was silent after the door clicked shut. For a long moment, I just stood in the hallway, listening to my own heartbeat. It was almost a relief, how quiet everything had become. No bright screens, no laughter that didn't reach her eyes, no careful negotiations over what respect should look like. I locked the door, turned the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the wood. My chest felt too tight to take a deep breath. You'd think a moment like that, finally cutting something loose, would feel triumphant. But all I felt was empty. I walked back into the kitchen and stared at my ring on the table. It looked small, insignificant, like something that used to mean a lot but had shrunk over time, too brittle to carry the weight I tried to pile onto it. I picked it up, turned it over in my palm, then slipped it into a drawer next to the takeout menus. It didn't deserve any ceremony. The house still smelled like her perfume, a floral sweetness clinging to the cushions, the curtains, my clothes. I went room to room, opening windows, not caring that it was already dark and the evening air had a bite to it. Anything to clear out the last traces of her. I don't remember sitting down, but somehow I ended up at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. They were still a little blackened around the nails from the day's work. That used to embarrass me, back when Lauren and I first started dating. I'd scrub my hands raw before taking her out, like if I cleaned up enough, I could convince her, and maybe myself, that I was worth something. Funny how you can spend years believing someone sees you, only to realize they were always squinting past you, looking for something shinier. I didn't have the energy to pick apart every moment that led us here. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house alone, replaying her last words on a loop. So I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Kira's name. She'd told me to call. She'd said it more than once. But it still felt like crossing some invisible line. Even if nothing had happened between us, I knew how it would look to anyone on the outside. I took a breath, thumb pressed call. It rang twice. She picked up with a quiet, wary hello. Hey, I said. My voice sounded rough. It's me. There was a pause, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. You okay? She asked, her tone gentle. Not really. You want me to come over? I hesitated. I didn't want to drag her into this any more than she already was. But the thought of sitting in that kitchen alone, breathing in the ghost of Lauren's perfume, was too much. Yeah, I said finally. If you don't mind. I'll be there in 15. She showed up in old jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. No makeup. No pretense. Just herself. When I opened the door, she didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, taking in whatever she saw in my face. Then she stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I stood stiff for a second. Then something in me nodded, and I let myself lean into her. It's over, I said against her hair. I told her to leave. I know, she murmured. It's okay. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just drinking coffee and letting the silence settle. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window screens. It felt fitting, like the weather understood what was happening better than I did. Eventually, she broke the quiet. Do you want to talk about it? I shook my head. Not yet. Okay. She reached across the table, her hand resting over mine. Then we don't have to. We sat like that until my shoulders stopped feeling so tight. Until my breathing evened out. She stayed until after midnight. We didn't talk much, just enough to fill the space between us with something other than regret. She told me about her work, how her manager kept forgetting to process payroll, how her neighbor's dog wouldn't stop barking at 3 a.m. She told me stupid little stories, and I realized how long it had been since I'd just listened to someone without bracing for a lie. When she finally stood to leave, I walked her to the door. She paused, one hand on the knob. If you need anything, you call me, she said. I will. She hesitated again. Then she leaned forward and kissed me on the cheek. Her lips warm against my skin. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. But it was something. After she left, I stood in the doorway a while longer, feeling like I'd stepped into a different life and wasn't sure how to move around in it yet. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, the way I always did. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the sky go from black to dull gray. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I'd feel regret, but all I felt was a tired relief. When I went out to the garage, it felt the same as it always had. The tools were still lined up along the pegboard. The workbench was still cluttered with half-finished repairs. I set my coffee down and just breathed in the familiar smells: oil, dust, metal. In that space, nothing had changed. And maybe that was the only thing that made sense anymore. Lauren called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, "We need to talk. Please. Just once." I didn't answer. An hour later, another text. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get like this. Can we meet?" Still nothing. By the time I closed the garage for the evening, there were 9 messages and 3 missed calls. I put my phone on silent and slid it into my back pocket. Some things didn't need to be revisited. A couple of days passed. I focused on work, took a few long drives after closing up shop, and tried not to think about what was waiting in the quiet hours. Kira texted once or twice. Nothing heavy, just checking in. I appreciated that she didn't push. Friday night, I was wiping down the counters when the doorbell rang. For a second, I considered ignoring it. But when I peeked through the window, I saw her standing there. Lauren. Her shoulders were hunched against the cold, her hair pulled back in a sloppy ponytail. She looked small, not the woman who used to laugh at me for being too old-fashioned. I opened the door, but didn't step aside to let her in. "Hi," she said, her voice hoarse. "Hi." She swallowed, her eyes darting to the bags still piled on the porch where I'd left them. "Can we talk?" I stayed silent. "Please," she whispered. "I know I messed up. I know I've been selfish. I didn't move. She looked down at her shoes. I thought I needed everyone to see me, to want me. But none of it feels real. Those people online, they don't care. And the men I've tried to date since, it's not the same. No one treats me like you did. I let her talk. I owed her that much. Her voice cracked. I ruined the best thing in my life. And I'm sorry. I nodded once. I believe you. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. So, can we try again? I took a slow breath. No. Her mouth opened and closed. I don't hate you, I said quietly. But I don't trust you. And I'm not interested in trying to pretend that will change. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I know. I closed the door gently. I didn't watch her walk away. That night, I sat on the porch, a blanket over my shoulders. The air smelled like wood smoke from someone's chimney. For the first time in years, I felt still. Not happy. Not yet. But still. My phone buzzed. A text from Kira. You okay? I typed back. Yeah. Just tired. Want some company? I thought about it. Then typed. Yeah. 15 minutes later, her car pulled up. She didn't knock. Just came around to the porch and sat beside me under the same blanket. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she turned to me. I've liked you for a long time, she said, voice low. I didn't want to say it when you were married. But I did. I looked at her. I know. She smiled a little, sad and warm all at once. I'm not asking for anything. Just telling you. I nodded. I'm glad you did. She hesitated. Then she leaned in and kissed me. Soft. Uncomplicated. When she pulled back, I exhaled. I can't promise anything right now, I said. I'm not asking you to. We sat there together until the stars came out. For the first time, I wasn't dreading tomorrow. The following weeks felt strange in a way I hadn't expected. You'd think that after a break like that, a marriage cracking wide open, you'd walk around feeling hollow or furious. But mostly, I just felt lighter. Like someone had set down a burden I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing how it weighed on me. Of course, there were moments that hit me sideways. Sometimes I'd wake in the dark, half reaching across the bed, expecting her warmth there out of habit. Other times, I'd come home from work, keys jingling in the lock, and for a few seconds I'd brace myself for the usual tension in the air. But there was nothing. Just the quiet, the soft creak of the floorboards, and the relief that no one was waiting to pick a fight or pretend nothing was wrong. Little by little, the spaces she'd left stopped feeling like losses and started feeling like room to breathe. Kira dropped by most evenings. Not because she was trying to insert herself into the gap Lauren had left, but because she was just there. Solid in a way I hadn't known I needed. Some nights, she'd bring over sandwiches, and we'd eat in the garage, perched on a couple of old stools with our feet resting on paint cans. Other times, she'd sit quietly while I worked, leafing through a magazine or sipping coffee. She never asked for more than I could give, never pressed me to define what we were. And that was the best part. I didn't feel like I owed her anything except honesty. One evening, after the sun had dropped behind the trees, we were sitting on the porch, sharing a couple of cold beers. The porch light buzzed overhead, and a moth kept fluttering against the bulb. Kira nudged my arm with her knee. You look like you're thinking too hard, she said. I huffed out a small laugh. Maybe I am. She studied me for a second. Want to talk about it? Not really. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. We sat there a while longer, not needing to fill the silence. I remember the evening Lauren came back more clearly than I wish I did. It was late spring, the air still holding a bit of chill. I was locking up the garage, the metal door rattling down into place, when I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, she was standing there under the street lamp. She looked different, not in any dramatic way, but in the small, human ways that happen when someone finally runs out of excuses. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, her face free of makeup. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Hey, she said, voice low and cautious. Hey. She looked past me at the closed garage, then down at her shoes. I'm not here to ask for anything. I didn't know who else to talk to. I didn't say anything. Just waited. She swallowed. I'm sorry. For all of it. I thought if enough people online paid attention to me, it would mean I mattered. But it didn't. Her eyes lifted to mine. I traded something real for a bunch of strangers telling me I was pretty. And now, I don't have any of it. I let her words hang between us. They didn't sting anymore. They just felt finished. I don't hate you, I said quietly. But I don't trust you. And I don't want any of it back. Her chin trembled. I know. I just needed to tell you I'm sorry. I nodded. I believe you. She didn't say anything else. After a few seconds, she turned and walked away into the dark. I didn't watch her go all the way down the block. That was the last time I saw her. The next morning, I packed up the last of her things, a chipped mug she used to drink tea out of, a stack of old magazines, a cardigan she'd always left draped over the couch. I put them in a box and set it by the back door. No note. No ceremony. Just done. That afternoon, Kira stopped by. She had her hair in a braid, stray wisps catching the wind when she got out of her car. "You okay?" she asked as she stepped onto the porch. I shrugged. Better than I expected. She looked at me a moment longer, then reached out and hooked her pinky through mine. It was the smallest gesture, but it anchored me. That night, she stayed over. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. She curled up next to me on the couch while I watched some old rerun, her head resting on my shoulder, her breath slow and even. It wasn't about replacing Lauren. It was about finally having space for something that wasn't tainted by resentment. The weeks blurred together in the best possible way. Work stayed steady. The garage kept me busy enough that my hands always had something to do. Kira came by often, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just sitting with me while the evening crept over the town. One Friday, we drove out to the lake. I hadn't been back there since that night. Everything had snapped for good. We sat on the hood of my truck, the sky overhead so clear it looked almost unreal. Kira pulled her knees up to her chest, her voice quiet when she finally spoke. "You ever think about leaving?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Where would you go?" I thought about it. "Anywhere that feels different. Not better. Just mine." She was quiet for a moment. "If you ever do, I'd like to be part of that." I looked over at her. There was no question mark in her words, no pleading, just a simple truth. "I'd like that too," I said. She smiled, then leaned over and kissed me. It was soft, unhurried, and when she pulled away, I didn't feel guilty for wanting more. On the drive home, she dozed off with her head on my shoulder. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting lightly against her thigh, feeling more settled than I had in a long time. When I pulled into her driveway, she stirred and blinked at me sleepily. "You okay?" she asked, voice rough with sleep. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in years." She smiled, kissed me once more, and slipped out of the truck. That night, lying in bed, I thought about everything I'd tried to save with Lauren. All the ways I'd bent myself into someone I thought she needed. And how, in the end, none of it was enough, because she'd never known what she wanted in the first place. I don't hate her. I don't wish her any harm. But I don't miss her either. I miss the man I was when I thought we could make it work. But that feels like another life now, and I don't need to carry it with me anymore. Kira and I never sat down to define what we were. We didn't need to. Some things don't need a label to be real. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next disappointment. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be,